do it. It'll turn out okay. And I looked at it today, so I guess it's still okay.
Yeah.
I've duct taped the problem temporarily, but I still gotta find a place that takes my insurance to get new glasses.
Oh, yeah, that's a problem.
But today, we're going to be talking about some historical documents. Last week, as with Kip, we talked about more historical documents. These documents are more modern compared to ancient Palestine Israel documents.
Little bit. Though these do mention the Jews, it's a little unfortunate.
We talk about the Magna Carta.
Yep.
Like your subtitle.
I'm not sure I've ever read through in its entirety before, because, as we'll get into, it's not actually as relevant a document as everybody thinks.
Like I said, I like your subtitle.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's true. For once, we can't blame Henry VIII. He wasn't born yet. For this one, we have to blame Henry II.
Still Henry-O.
Still a Henry. So, once again, in order to really understand why the document exists, we've got to do a little bit of history first. And we're going to start with a time period in English history called the Anarchy. Which is, exactly as fun as it sounds like. So Henry I seized the throne on the death of his father, William the Conqueror, even though he was the fourth son. He was the one closest to the center, physically closest to the centers of power at the time, and basically was like, yep, mine now.
No. I got to correct it there. His brother was king for a little bit before him, William II.
Yeah, but
then he died after he was king. I don't know who he was king for, but he died mysteriously in a hunting accident.
Right. But he still did have, two other older brothers who could, yeah. This is not really my time period. Most of what I know about the Anarchy, I know from having read the wonderful book Pillars of the Earth by Ken Follett, which is set during the Anarchy. So his own son, his own legitimate son, apparently he had many, many illegitimate children, as was the fashion at the time. William Adelin predeceased him without heir. Dies, no kids.
Yeah, in a boating in a shipping accident or boating accident.
Yeah, it was called the White Ship, and it sank. All hands lost, crossing the English Channel. Apparently there was partying going on. It was a whole thing. So Henry made the barons swear fealty to his surviving legitimate daughter. That should be called instead of allied. Both Empress Maud and Empress Matilda, depending on who you talk to. Many of them broke their oaths, leading to nearly 2 decades of civil war. It was ended when Stephen of Blois, I don't speak French, grandson of William the Conqueror and Matilda's rival, agreed to name her son Henry as heir.
Yeah, they are first cousins.
Yeah. He was the son of one of the other sons.
No, of a daughter.
Oh, with a daughter? Okay.
Well, because his last name was Stephen Boy, so
yeah. Matilda's son Henry was also Count of Anjou from his mother's marriage to Geoffrey, Count of Anjou. This is Henry II here.
Yeah,
he took the throne in 1154.
I gotta give a little history lesson myself now here.
Mm-hmm.
It all started out. William the Conqueror was the Duke of Normandy, so and then he conquered England, became King of England. Then, his William Henry I married not only more land, but Henry I married the great granddaughter of the last Anglo-Saxon King of England. So that kind of like tied their families
Held
together.
up the claim.
Yeah, then Henry, after Henry's daughter Matilda, her first husband died, the Holy Roman Emperor. Then she married the Count of Anjou, which added more French lands to the king. Then their kid Henry II married another big chunk.
We're getting to her. She's next.
Okay.
He took the throne in a
They owned a lot of France. I'm saying.
Oh yeah. At this point, the kings of England owned large chunks of France. We're getting to that. It's really important. So he took the throne in 1154 on the death of his first cousin once removed. Many of his lands were in France, and he did not even speak English. Eleanor of Aquitaine, greatest woman in Europe. There are no portraits of her from life. This is her tomb effigy, which is the closest we have. She divorced Louis VII of France, with whom she had 2 daughters, but no sons, so, you know. She married Henry VIII, with whom she had 8 children total. 4 boys, as I recall. Their marriage was complicated. She's beautifully portrayed by Katharine Hepburn in The Lion in Winter. There's also a version with Glenn Close, which is good, but Katharine Hepburn should be your standard. Richard, the almost never in England. After a lot of family conflict we don't have time to get into, seriously watch The Lion in Winter, Eleanor and Henry's 3rd son, Richard, became King of England. I know what's going on with the other sons. I looked it all up, but there is so much going on. This family was so, royals weren't expected to parent in those days. By royal standards, Henry and Eleanor were terrible parents. A friend is listening to a podcast that refers to them as Henry and Eleanor's fail sons.
Yeah, they tried to claim that throne a lot earlier than usual.
Yeah, there was a whole war between Henry and his sons, and what with one thing and another, Richard ends up on the throne. He almost immediately left on crusade. He spent 6 months of his 10 years as king actually in England, though he also spent some of that time in his family lands in France, so it's not like he was just, off in the Holy Land and off being captured by the Germans and whatever.
Yeah, I believe this was the 3rd crusade.
2nd, I think. But crusades are also not my time period. His marriage to Berengaria of Navarre was childless. Why that is, we don't know. There's speculation, but there's no historical certainty.
I think I can guess is they didn't have enough time together to do the deed.
That is one of the many possibilities. So then we go to John Lackland. Since all 4 of his older brothers died young, John became King of England. And here's what, I was talking about how terrible parents Henry and Eleanor were. His father gave him the nickname John Lackland.
Yeah.
Because he was the 5th son and not expected to inherit anything.
Yeah, you may have heard of John from certain mythologies.
Yeah, he is, if you've heard of Prince John, this is your Prince John. The one line in I love the Disney Robin Hood. The one line that always gets me is, too late to be known as John the First, because he is in fact John the Only. He is the only King John in English history. There's an English tradition that they actually went against a couple generations back now, of not naming your child after failed monarchs, which is why I was so surprised that they named a kid Charles. But nobody has ever named their child John again. Nobody even considers naming their kids John. He started
what about Richard? Is that?
There's been no Richard since Richard III. Because, well, certainly the Tudors weren't ever going to name a kid Richard, and not really the Stuarts either.
Yeah.
And while I don't think he had the princes in the Tower killed, they're still not going to name their kids after him.
Yeah, but because also every Richard so far has been a dead end. Like Richard the First had no kids, Richard the Second had no kids, Richard Third had one kid, but then that kid died.
Yeah, and also the whole conquered by Henry VII thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's probably never going to be a Richard again. There will never be another John. He started what will become a centuries-long tradition of losing English lands in France.
Yeah, all the land that his father married into and inherited. Not anymore.
Yeah, no, like he lost like half of the English lands in France, and a lot of what happened came from his determination to keep it. So we're getting to that too. Many of his choices remained aimed at maintaining Angevin's strength on the continent instead of really worrying about England. This is the thing, is these monarchs barely considered themselves English. They were French. I believe Richard is thought to have spoken a little English, but for a very long time, the kings of England didn't speak English.
Yeah.
Because...
Should we talk... Sorry, should we talk about the lovely government of feudalism?
Probably should do a little bit. So the feudalism is kind of a pyramid scheme. The average person was what was called a serf, which was a person who was bound to the land. And they were, whoever owned the land controlled the person.
It's like a step of, maybe either equal to or a step right above slave.
Yeah. And serfdom in Europe didn't end until, I think it was finally eliminated in Russia in the 19th century.
Yeah.
So it was, in England, in practical terms, serfdom really goes away in the 14th century with the Black Death. For a lot of Europe, the Black Death changed social structures and wiped out serfdom entirely. But even then, peasants were still the bottom of the heap. And there were, merchants and craftsmen and things, and they were sort of glorified peasants for the purposes of the social structure. And then you get into knights who are sworn to a specific lord. And the lord is generally sworn directly to the king. So everybody's got to do what the king tells them to, when the king tells them to, more or less. The church is kind of separate, but not entirely. How the church works at this time is fairly complicated because there's a lot of overlap between the church and the state. Most of the important churchmen were, it's kind of surprising that John hadn't been trained for the church, because most of the important churchmen in the realm were younger sons. The Archbishop of Canterbury, during a large amount of the anarchy, was Stephen of Blois' younger brother. That was just how it was. And so it was very much a top-down pyramid. King is at the top. Everybody else is of lesser and lesser importance until you get to the serfs.
Yeah.
And that's a quick and dirty explanation. This is important
because all the land that they owned in France, technically, they were vassal to the King of France.
Yeah. Technically, they were subservient in France to the King of France, which they did not like. So, vis et voluntas, which I don't remember what it means, even though I put it as my title, because I'm smart like that. Rule in France was based strongly on the idea of the divine right of kings. This held that the king was in charge because God said so. Rule in England was strongly based on the idea that the king was just as subject to the laws of the land as his nobles, who had their own authority apart from the king's. So, like, the king couldn't just make you not a noble anymore. In theory. In practice, but yeah. John's barons started to refuse to levy troops for his wars on the continent and resented the raised taxes to cover mercenaries. This is a quote from the Disney Robin Hood, but I couldn't resist. "I'm scared of Prince John. He's cranky." John was also bluntly not considered a pleasant person to be around.
Yeah, I think the only movie I've seen more than that one is the Men in Tights version.
I've seen the Disney one more. I love the Disney one. It's one of my absolute favorites. I made the Maid Marian at the Renaissance Fair very upset by explaining my theory of how nobility applies to wearing pants in that movie. Because the only characters who wear pants are the nobles, which she had never noticed, because she's mad because through most of the movie, Robin doesn't wear pants, and then at the end, when he marries Maid Marian, he's wearing pants. Like, sure, he's a noble now, and she's never forgiven me for that. So he was known to be short-tempered, and he had affairs with married noblewomen, not something accepted in a king at the time. Affairs with unmarried noblemen was affairs with peasants. It didn't matter if they were married or not. Married noblemen was a step too far at the time. Between his failures, his taxes, his cruelty, and his disregard for the advice of his nobles, he would have needed much more personal charisma than he was believed to have in order to prevent civil war.
Yeah.
John.
Yeah, there's a thing that I read somewhere, especially I think it was during the reign of Edward IV. A lot of noble people didn't like it when kings married the lower classes because that gave the noble people more power, and that's why kings only usually married other kings' daughters.
Yeah, it was considered risky to marry the daughter of any particular noble family because her relatives would use that as a way to gain power for the family. You see that a lot in the reign of Henry VIII. First the Boleyns and then the Seymours both played that particular game. And the Howards didn't, partially because she wasn't around long enough, and partially because the Howards were related to the Boleyns and they were still a little hesitant about the whole thing. So, yeah. But it was... So then we get to the Great Charter, which is what Magna Carta literally translates to. In order to prevent a second anarchy, because there was no other obvious successor, it's not like John had any brothers left, for example. Yeah. John agreed to a formal statement of the rights of his barons. He met with the rebel barons, who presented him with a list of their demands. On June 19th, I forgot to mention the year, but anyway, the document was agreed on and the barons formally renewed their oaths of fealty and loyalty.
Yeah. The other history lesson here, a lot of the barons in England also owned land in France.
Yeah.
So when the king lost his land in France, he lost their land in France too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And there were French noblemen who didn't have land in England who were vassals of the English kings because, if you owned land in Anjou, then you owed your fealty to the Duke of Anjou. But if the Duke of Anjou loses his lands, now your fealty doesn't belong to him, or else you lose your lands, or, So a lot of things were happening because of that, and a lot of people were very unhappy. And it didn't help that nobody liked John as a person. What isn't the Magna Carta? The Magna Carta is not a constitution. It doesn't set up a form of government because the form of government is already in place. It doesn't establish how most of the ruling of the country is going to be done because everybody already knew that. The Magna Carta is not about the rights of the common man. Nobody cared. It's about the barons. The Magna Carta is not, for the most part, still in force. 3, I believe, provisions of the Magna Carta still have any power in England, much less anywhere else. The Magna Carta is not the first document limiting the power of a king. It is the most noteworthy. It's the one people hear about, but there had been other documents like it before. What is the Magna Carta? The Magna Carta is an attempted peace treaty. It was intended to stall for time so that the Pope, with whom John had made up, he'd been excommunicated briefly, and that was all taken care of, would let the rebels know they had to do what John told them to because of the whole render unto Caesar thing. The Pope was very big on kings are an authority, you do what they say. So because John was no longer excommunicated,
which back then was the biggest thing that could happen to anybody.
Yeah. The worst thing that can happen to you in the Catholic Church is to be excommunicated. And especially it's worse for a king because while John was excommunicated, not only could he not receive any of the benefits of the Catholic Church, for the most part, neither could his people. I believe they allowed baptisms and last rites, and that was it. And to a devout Catholic, that's scary. The idea that God is basically ignoring your entire country because of what your king did kind of led to John's unpopularity, really. But he had made up with all that. He was no longer excommunicated. And he knew that the Pope would send word saying, no, you have to listen to John. So he was really stalling for time for that word to get there because it took a long time for, letters to travel in 13th century Europe.
No email?
I think this is 1215.
No email?
No email. No telegraph. So the Magna Carta is intended to ensure that John cannot be a tyrant to the barons. That's who this is about. And that's why most of it is no longer still in force. So I'm not going to read all of this. Because this is mostly just a list of who's involved in the whole thing. The one thing I'll note is there are like 12 Williams and 8 Henrys in the list of people involved. But this is John, by the grace of God, King of England, Lord of Ireland, Duke of Normandy and Aquitaine, and Count of Anjou was his full title at the time. To the archbishops, bishops, abbots, earls, barons, justiciars, foresters, sheriffs, stewards, servants, and to all his bailiffs and faithful subjects, greeting. And then he's saying, I'm going to take the advice of these people. And lists barons and earls and churchmen and so forth. And I don't know who most of these people are, because A, it's not my era, and B, even if it were, I'm not sure how important they all were. In the first place, we have conceded to God, and by this our present charter confirmed for us and our heirs forever. Oh, by the way, all of this was in medieval Latin, so this is a translation I found online. because I don't speak medieval Latin.
So this wasn't even in Middle English or Old English.
No, this wasn't in Middle English. This wasn't in Middle French. This is in medieval Latin, because that was still the language of formal documents. Confirm for us and our heirs forever that the English Church shall be free and shall have her rights entire and her liberties inviolate, and we wish that it be thus observed. This is apparent from the fact that we, of our pure and unconstrained will, did grant the freedom of elections, which is reckoned most important and very essential to the English Church, and did by our charter confirm and did obtain the ratification of the same from our Lord Pope Innocent III, before the quarrel arose between us and our barons. This freedom we will observe, and our will is that it be observed in good faith by our heirs forever. Which is basically, look, I've talked to the Pope, and I'm not going to interfere with church elections anymore. I'm on good terms with the Pope now. Because there was a tradition in those days, and I don't know if it still holds true because, that monks elected abbots. Often they elected bishops as well. That churchmen were responsible for church hierarchy. And one of the reasons John had been excommunicated was he said, but what if I'm in charge of that? Which, as we know, Henry VIII would take and run with some centuries down the road. Caring less about being excommunicated than John did, because this was before Lutheranism. We have also granted to all free men of our kingdom, for us and our heirs forever, all the underwritten liberties to be had and held by them and their heirs, of us and our heirs forever. This doesn't include serfs.
Because they weren't free men.
Because they weren't free. I don't know what percentage of the population was serfs, but it was pretty high. So, all of those people eliminated. Plus, it goes without saying, 50% of the population was eliminated anyway, because when he says free men, he's not using that as a gender-neutral term. He means men. There are some provisos in here specifically about women, but most of these rights will be seen to be about men.
And by women, they mean noble women with heirs.
Generally so, yeah.
Like Eleanor of Aquitaine.
Like Eleanor of Aquitaine, yeah. No, and my thing is it's really funny to me how much of the Disney Robin Hood is spent with Prince John stressing about his mother, because yes, he and Eleanor did not really get along that well. And the thing is, there are no numbers. There are numbers that have been attached to these clauses in later years, but this is one long document without numbers separating anything. I'm not even sure there's paragraph breaks.
So is this worse or better than we read earlier this last year of the Constitution?
There are a lot more words I had to look up, I'll tell you that. And I have footnotes in places for the words that I feel are not in common usage. If there's any that you don't get, let me know, and I'll see if I can define them. The language is about equally dense. If any of our earls or barons, or others holding of us in chief by military service, shall have died, and at the time of his death his heir shall be of full age and over relief, he shall have his inheritance on payment of the ancient relief, namely the heir or heirs of an earl, £100 for a whole earl's barony, the heir or heir of a baron, £100 for a whole barony, the heir or heirs of a knight, 100 shillings at most for a whole knight's fee, and whoever owes less, let him give less, according to the ancient custom of fiefs.
Real fast, those who don't know, an earl is the equivalent of a count or a county, which is why an earl's wife is called a countess, not an earless.
Yeah, a lot of noble titles are kind of confused because they were blending two political systems. Count is the French term, Earl is the British term. So Earl and Count are kind of interchangeable. Earl is, I believe a baron is below an earl, but I have to look it up.
Yeah, you're right. I am pretty sure you're right. You're right.
And
I think it goes
duke is as high as you go before hitting royalty. And a lot of royalty actually holds dukedoms, but that's, yeah.
The basics, I think is Duke, Earl, and Baron, and there's maybe Viscount and all the stuff below, but those are the three main ones.
Viscount and Marcus, and it's like certain hands in poker. I can never keep track of which is higher or lower. It's just not going to stick in my brain. I've learned it for years. It's just, my brain doesn't care.
Royal Flush is the highest, King is the highest.
Yeah, that Ace is often the highest. But yeah, that's the sort of thing that I know.
Why I meant King in this thing. Yeah.
If, however, the heir of any of the aforesaid has been underage and in wardship, which means under the care of someone not their parents, let him have his inheritance without relief and without fine when he comes of age. So if you're 14 and your dad dies, you wait until they decide you're of age, which was not as consistently 18 in those days. Age of inheritance kind of varied through history. But certainly they're not going to let a 7-year-old get his inheritance right then. The guardian of the land of an heir who is thus underage shall take from the land of the heir nothing but reasonable produce, reasonable customs, and reasonable services, and that without destruction or waste of men or goods. And if we have committed the wardship of the lands of any such minor to the sheriff, or to any other who is responsible to us for its issues, and he has made destruction or waste of what he holds in wardship, we will take of him amends, and the land shall be committed to 2 lawful and discreet men of that fief, who shall be responsible for the issues to us or to him to whom we shall assign them. And if we have given or sold the wardship of any such land to anyone, and he has therein made destruction or waste, he shall lose that wardship, and it shall be transferred to 2 lawful and discreet men of that fief, who shall be responsible to us in like manner as the aforesaid. Basically, whoever holds the custody, basically, of an heir who is underage, they have to do right by the land. And they have to be responsible for that inheritance. Also
underage back then probably meant a little different than underage today.
Yeah, like I said, it's age of inheritance varied a lot by tradition, location, time, what have you. But for purposes of these conversations, we're going to say a 7-year-old. Because I don't think there's ever been a time when a 7-year-old has been considered old enough to inherit and do so on their own. So let's say my son was 7 and his father, well, it didn't have to be me, just his father, because I'm a woman. His father dies. So if he's a noble, the king would appoint a guardian for him who would be responsible for him and for his territories. Hello. And that guardian, under the Magna Carta, would be required to treat it properly. And if they didn't, the king would be responsible for finding 2 men who live in the territory to make sure that things were treated the way they were supposed to be, so that there would be an inheritance when the kid comes of age, whatever that age is. And the person who is, screwing things up owes restitution. The guardian, moreover, so long as he has the wardship of the land, shall maintain the houses, parks, fish ponds, stanks, that means dams, mills, and other things pertaining to the land, out of the revenues of that land. And he shall restore to the heir, when he has come to full age, all his land stocked with plows and wainage, that's tools and so forth, according as the season of husbandry requires, and the revenues of the land can reasonably support. So the money that the land is making goes towards keeping everything up, which is perfectly reasonable. And while this exact, article is not considered the force of English law anymore, the concept still is. If you're a guardian for a minor child, the inheritance has to be taken care of, and you pay the bills for the estate out of what the estate raises. Heirs shall be married without disparagement, not married to someone below their station. However, before a marriage takes place, it shall be known to the heir's next of kin. So, if you are, if the kid is an heir, and let's say the kid is heir to a baron, you can't marry the kid to the daughter of a knight, because that's someone below their station. And you have to let whoever their next of kin is know about it. Should the kid die, who's going to take on the land next? That person has to be told about the marriage. Hi, Lil.
Yeah, so just like how kings were supposed to be married below their ranks, the same goes with the other noble classes, I guess.
Yeah, and that's part of why there's so much inbreeding in the upper classes. Because partially because all of these marriages were really political alliances. Like, there are occasional stories of people marrying for love in the upper classes. Like
Edward IV, perhaps?
Yeah. But, and there's a certain belief that Henry and Eleanor initially married for love, even if they then spent the rest of their lives fighting. But, by and large, it's political and it's financial. And there's no political gain to letting the child of an earl marry the child of a knight, or the child of a knight marry the child of a merchant. You have to marry your heir to somebody of equal rank. And there were some wobbles of that rule. There were kings who married noble women. And sometimes you get somebody in the nobility marrying for money. Marrying a particularly wealthy merchant. But usually that was a man of higher rank marrying a woman of lower rank. It almost never happens the other way around. A widow, after the death of her husband, shall forthwith and without difficulty have her marriage portion and inheritance. She shall not give anything for her dower, or for her marriage portion, or for the inheritance which her husband and she held on the day of the death of that husband. She may remain in the house of her husband for 40 days after his death, within which time her dower shall be assigned to her. So if your husband dies, this is still in the days of dowries. So your family paid to have your husband marry you. If he dies, you get that money back because that's what you're in theory going to be living on. Marriage portion is what you bring to the marriage. Any inheritance that you've gotten, because while you were married, your inheritances went to your husband. But when he dies, they transfer back to you because that's what you're going to live on now that you're a widow. You can stay in the husband's house because presumably that house is going to your husband's next male heir.
Which hopefully is also your heir.
Right. But if it's his brother, his cousin, whoever, you can still live in that house for 40 days to figure out what you're doing next. You're not getting thrown out on the street as soon as your husband dies. And I believe this one actually applied to all classes, but I'm not sure because not really my thing. No widow shall be compelled to marry as long as she prefers to remain without a husband, always provided that she gives assurance not to marry without our consent if she holds her lands from us, or else without the consent of whatever other lord she from whom she holds her lands. I think that's a typo on the part that I copied. Yeah, Juana was known historically as Juana the Mad, and it's the Habsburgs, man. Habsburg's gonna Habsburg.
Oh yeah, this was the daughter of Ferdinand and Isabella and the mother of Charles V / Charles I.
Yeah. I feel really sorry for her. I don't think she was mentally ill so much as she was screwed over. But with the Habsburgs, it's hard to say. So basically, widows can't be forced to marry, but they can be told they can't marry. She's got to get permission from whoever controls the lands. Whoever's the next step up on the pyramid has to give their permission for widows to marry. If she's the widow of a count, then inbreeding definitely is a hell of a thing. If she's the widow of a count, she's got to get permission from the king. If she's the widow of a knight, she's got to get permission from her baron, what have you.
What if she's the widow of the king?
Yeah, John didn't want to think about that because that would mean he was dead and therefore no longer in control. In practice, the widow of a king had to get the permission of the next king, and probably wouldn't.
Yeah, I think the only thing that came relevant, I believe, was when Henry V's widow married that Tudor guy, Owen Tudor.
Yeah, Henry V's widow married Owen Tudor, and then Catherine Parr married Tom Seymour. And I don't know if she got permission, but since Tom Seymour was the king's favorite uncle at the time, she probably could have. And Henry VIII had some issue with one of his sisters remarrying without his express permission. She'd agreed to marry the really old and feeble king of France on the proviso that she'd be able to pick her next husband. And she did, and Henry got mad about it. Because he hadn't actually meant it. Yeah. Neither we nor our bailiffs shall seize for any debt any land or rent so long as the chattels, that's physical possessions, which is why chattel slavery is a term, because it means that the person has become a physical possession. Anyway, so long as the chattel of the debtor are sufficient to repay the debt, nor shall those that pledge sureties for the debtor be distrained so long as the principal debtor himself is able to pay the debt. If the principal debtor fails to pay the debt, having nothing wherewith to pay it, then the sureties shall answer for the debt. They shall have the lands and rents of the debtor, if they desire them, until they are reimbursed for the debt which they have paid for him, unless the principal debtor can show proof that he has discharged his obligations to them. So you can't take land, but you can take stuff to pay for rent. Like, if I'm going to use myself as an example, even though I'm a woman, we're pretending here. So if I had racked up a debt and I had land, you couldn't seize my land to pay for it if I had, furniture and so forth, and farm animals and whatever that would pay my debt. You couldn't go after anyone who had agreed to be sure that I would pay until you had gone after me first and gotten whatever I had to pay the debt. And if I don't have enough furniture and farm animals, you have my land and rents until the debt is paid. And if I can prove the debt is paid, I get my land back. So you can't leave me destitute, but you can take away my stuff. And if I have said, yeah, I'll make sure that Steve pays his debt, and Steve doesn't and can't pay his debt, then you can come after me. Frickin' Steve, man. So this is one of the ones that has aged poorly. If one who has borrowed from the Jews any sum, great or small, dies before that loan can be repaid, his heir shall pay no interest on the debt for so long as he remains under age, irrespective from whom he holds his lands. If such a debt falls into our hands, we will take nothing except the principal sum mentioned in the bond. So this gets into some complicated history. Specifically that Christians were, at the time, considered to be religiously forbidden for charging interest on loans. So I could loan you money, but I couldn't make a living. Well, assuming I were still Christian. I could loan you money, but I couldn't make a living loaning you money because I couldn't get interest. They don't want my couch. But Jews were considered able to to charge interest to Gentiles. They didn't charge interest on loans to other Jews for the most part. That was considered religiously questionable. But you could charge Gentiles all the interest you wanted. And so that is one of the reasons why a lot of the prominent banking families of Europe were historically Jewish. It's one of those, they were forced into a fairly specific industry and then shamed for being involved in that industry. Because anti-Semitism.
Yeah, that way, we can't pay it back. Let's exile the Jews now.
Yeah, and that happened in several countries over the centuries, and it's a whole thing. And, the good thing that this is saying, now that we've gotten the anti-Semitism out of the way, is that if I die owing money to, we'll call it the bank, my kid doesn't have to pay interest on that until he's of age. And if the debt fell into the hands of the king, the king wouldn't charge interest because he's a Christian and he's not allowed to. Well, Lil, I've spent a lot of my life studying, we'll call it the history of bigotry, but like the whole Jews in the film industry thing. The film industry was one of the places that didn't have an established hierarchy of Gentiles keeping Jews out. It was a whole new industry. So they got involved in it because, hey, look, it's jobs. It's so stupid when you really look into the history of that, of, oh, the Jews control such. Yeah, here's why it's the fault of Gentiles. It's always the fault of Gentiles. And if anyone die indebted to the Jews, same whole shtick, his wife shall have her dower and pay nothing of that debt. And if any children of the deceased are left under age, necessary shall be provided for them in keeping with the holding of the deceased. The debt shall be paid out of the residue, save the service due to feudal lords. Let debts due to others than Jews be dealt in the same similar manner. So, okay, my partner dies, and we'll pretend I'm married for the purposes of this conversation. If we have a mortgage on the house, so if I had a dowry, you couldn't take from my dowry to pay the mortgage. And if the kids, what money my partner has to in part go to keeping my kids alive. They have to be fed and housed. You can take the rest of my partner's money to pay off his debt or his feudal lords, as the case may be. But you can't leave the widow and children homeless because of this debt. And possibly the only really interesting part of that is that this specifies that it's not just Jews who can't leave widows and children destitute. Gentiles can't leave widows and children destitute either. Which I support. Let's not leave widows and children destitute, kids. I think this is the last we're going to be hearing about Jews in this, but there's still some stuff that's not aged well.
I have no idea why.
It's only from 1215. What are you talking about, Gillian? No scutage, which is a payment made by a knight in lieu of military service. So if you're like my age and a knight, you could just pay off your lord instead of owing him actual physical service. No scutage nor age shall be imposed on our kingdom, unless by common council of our kingdom, except for ransoming our person, for making our eldest son a knight, and marrying our eldest daughter one time. For these only a reasonable age should be levied. In like manner it shall be done concerning aids from the city of London. So basically, rather than demanding that you give him money so that he can go fight his wars in France, either the whole kingdom, well, the Common Council, which is basically, we're getting into Parliament here. Unless Parliament agrees, or if he has been kidnapped and held for ransom like his brother was, his oldest son is becoming a knight, or his eldest daughter is getting married for the first time, he can charge these fees. And they can't be too high. He can't just randomly demand these fees to go fight wars in France that he's going to lose. Because, spoiler, he lost a lot of wars in France. And the city of London, I believe this is one of the ones that's still considered legally in force. And the city of London shall have all its ancient liberties and free customs by land as well as by water. Furthermore, we decree and grant that all other cities, boroughs, towns, and ports shall have all their liberties and free customs, which is basically cities can have government.
Now, we'll file a question for you if you know this or not. Is this the entire city, the big city of London, or the little London inside London?
I think this is the little London inside London, because I think that was most of London at this point. But I don't know.
Yeah, in case you didn't know that, there's two. In case you guys didn't know that, there's two Londons.
Yes. And I don't know a lot about when London expanded. Because London has been London for literally thousands of years at this point. You know, like, I've seen, there's a British show that I like called Time Team, which is, speed archaeology, basically. It's fantastic. But every once in a while, they're in London, and the age of artifacts they pull out of the ground. There has been London in London for thousands of years. Going back to the Roman era when it was Londinium, and before. Like, London is a thing. It is one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities in the world.
Also, we are now 1/3 done with this.
Hooray! I told you this was a very long document. And for obtaining the common consent of the kingdom concerning the assessment of an aid other than in the 3 cases specified above, or of a scutage, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, because it's not a word that people use anymore. Anyway, we will cause to be summoned the archbishops, bishops, abbots, earls, and greater barons individually through our letters. Moreover, all others who are our direct tenants, we will cause a general summons to be made by our sheriffs and bailiffs for a fixed date, namely after the expiry of at least 40 days, and at a fixed place. In all such letters of summons, we will specify the reason of the summons, and when the summons has thus been made, the business shall proceed on the day appointed, according to the counsel of such as are present, although not all who were summoned have come. Yes, London and London before it was London. It is all London. So this is basically the establishment of Parliament. And I'm not an expert on the history of Parliament, so there may have been something approaching it before then. But this is basically like, if the king wants to raise money, he's got to go through Parliament. Here's how that's going to work.
And when we say Parliament, this is mainly just the precursor of the House of Lords. Nothing to do with the House of Commons.
This is archbishops, bishops, abbots, earls, and greater barons. This is the top level of people. This isn't even knights, and direct tenants. So basically, you have to be fairly high in the feudalism pyramid to be part of this at this point. But it's saying, I have to send you a letter. It has to give a specific day and time when we're meeting. That day has to be at least 40 days from when I send the letter. And while you don't have to come, I have to listen to the people who do. This is business that's being conducted by people, not the king, to talk about what money I as king can have. In future, we not, again, I think this is a typo from the site I was copy pasting from, we not grant to anyone license to take an aid from his own free men, unless to ransom his person, to make his eldest son a knight, and once to marry his eldest daughter. And on each of these occasions, only a reasonable aid shall be levied. So, if you're a baron, you can't tax the hell out of your serfs and your knights and things just because you want to. You have this list of reasons, and it has to be a reasonable amount. Now it only talks about, these specific circumstances, and there are still other reasons you can tax the hell out of people. But it's the 13th century. There's only so much we're really gonna allow in the way of underclasses to have money. No man shall be compelled to do more service for a knight's fee or for any other land freeholding than is due for it. If you're a knight, you're expected to do a certain amount of work as a knight. But they can't make you do this. This is no forced overtime. Which is a law in a lot of places, but it's not a law that necessarily gets obeyed. Oh, there it is. Oh, yes, go right now. So you have to do the work that's expected of you, but you can't be forced to do more than that just because the person who tells you to do work expects it.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, some of these are really very simple once you make your way through the language. Common pleas shall not follow our court about, but shall be held in some fixed place. So there are some things that you have to petition the king for. There are a lot more you don't. You just need a judge. And those are going to be in one place instead of having to go to the king's court over, a minor border dispute between one barony and the next. Or, oh, he killed my pig. You don't have to go to the king's court to get somebody to deal with the battle about the pig.
So no pig wars here.
I mean, there can be a pig war. It's just that the pig war is going to be settled in one specific place instead of by following the king. Because in those days, kings moved around a lot. The court was not in a specific place. In part because court was expensive.
Yeah, and also back then, kings were the leaders of the army. The kings actually led the troop to battle.
Kings led troops to battle, but also, if you were staying with one of your lords, then it was the lord's job to feed, house, and entertain you. And that took money off, that took the burden off of your funds. Elizabeth I really liked taking advantage of that. And, a full court eats a lot of food. And if you kept moving around, you didn't overburden the food production of any one place. And it was the king's job to personally oversee a lot of his personal lands and to be seen to be performing his duties in person in everywhere that he directly controlled. So the court moved just constantly. And if you had to figure out where the court was and get there before they left for every minor dispute, that was not feasible. So you can take your, this is actually really simple and doesn't require direct royal attention matter, to a judge who's in one place. And you just go to that place and somebody there will make a decision. And, if you disagree with it, I don't know if there was really a petition higher up system. But at the very least, the simple stuff was dealt with. Yes. Oh, yeah. Well, entertaining Elizabeth was really expensive, even by royal standards, because Elizabeth liked her entertainment. So I don't blame anyone who went out of their way to try to make sure that The state didn't have to pay for all that.
So there wasn't like a court of appeals like we have today.
I mean, there wasn't the same formal court structure, full stop. And how things were tried depended a lot on your station. So, again, this is something I'm not really an expert in because medieval law, man, they were barely getting the concept of court in place. Justice system, full stop, had not fully been defined yet. But at the very least, you could go before a magistrate. One of you said his piece, the other of you said his piece, and the magistrate, because it was men, and the magistrate would make up their mind. And there might be witnesses, and there might be evidence, or there might be just two people arguing, and yeah, it's a whole thing, and we're about to get even more into the weeds with it. So,
yay!
Yay! I have to pronounce. I don't. Possibly French, possibly Latin. I don't know. Inquests of Nouvelle de Cesson. I only vaguely understand this one myself. Letting people claim dispossessed land back, I think. Mort d'ancestor. An inquest whether someone was legally prevented from inheriting. And Deron presentiment. I don't really understand this one either. Something to do with patronage and the clergy. And I looked up these terms, and I read what people said about them. I'm like, I don't know what this means. Because it's all in law speak, and I'm not a lawyer. So, anyway, these inquests shall only be held in their own county courts in the following manner. We, or should we be out of the kingdom, our chief justice will send 2 justices to each county 4 times a year, who, along with 4 knights of each county chosen by that county, shall hold the assize in the county and on the day and in the meeting place of the county court. So this is basically, we're going to have a court of some sort. Here's how this is going to work. We'll send justices. It'll be fine. And knights. And again, I don't really understand the legal terms, and this is better than we're going to get further on. So, yeah. If any of the said assizes cannot be held on the day of the county court, let there remain as many of the knights and freeholders who were present at the county court on that day as are necessary for the efficient making of judgments, according to whether the business is more or less. So if, you couldn't get through all of the cases in one day, people would be held over to hear the cases on the following day, rather than having to wait until, 3 months on down the road when they have the next court date. A freeman shall only be amerced, fined arbitrarily, for a trivial offense in accordance with the seriousness of the offense. For a grave offense, he shall be fined correspondingly, leaving him his contenement. No one seems to know what this word means. From what I can tell, its only appearance in medieval Latin is in this document. So it seems to mean what he needs for his livelihood, but nobody actually knows. A merchant will be fined similarly, leaving him his merchandise, and a villain, that's serf, shall be immersed in the same way, leaving him his wainage, if they have fallen into our mercy. These amercements shall only be imposed by the assessment on oath of reputable local men. So basically, you can't be fined trivially. If you're being fined for a specific offense, the fine has to make sense for the level of what that offense is. And you can't lose what you need in order to keep your business going. Like if you're a carpenter, they can't fine you your tools, because then you can't make a living.
You can keep your hammer and your nails, everything else is fair game.
Right. Right.
Maybe
Not even
small.
nails, because those, would be provided by the person you were building for, but your hammer and your saw and so forth.
Yeah.
And again, that's probably what it means, but we aren't 100% sure because nobody knows what that word means. Which is the most astounding thing I discovered while working on this, was that there are words in this document that people are like, well, we think it means this, but we don't know. And part of that is because the Magna Carta kind of fell out of importance for a really long time. Like during the Wars of the Roses, they had other things to worry about, And the Puritans started bringing it back into importance long about the time of the Stuarts. And that's when you get into the whole, battle between the divine right of kings and the right of people to not be tyrannized over. And the Victorians got passionately devoted to the Magna Carta. But I don't think most of them had read it, because so much of this stuff is completely irrelevant to, like, everything. And because there's that couple of centuries where it fell out of use and importance, and because language changed a lot in that time period, there's like a half a dozen words that we're kind of guessing at, which is amazing to me. Earls and barons shall be immersed only by their peers, and only in proportion with the degree of the offense. Peasants don't get to control how much money earls and barons are charged. Not even knights.
Only dukes and kings?
Earls and barons by earls and barons, basically, is what this is saying. Oh, man. I don't know if you've seen Lil, but I literally talked for 24 hours on this channel, almost, about the Constitution, and I know so much more about it than anyone I've ever had wave the Constitution at me and tell me that they loved it and were following it. It really is a fairly short document, and they have not read it. A clerk in holy orders shall not be immersed in respect of his lay holding except as previously described. Further, his ecclesiastical benefice shall not be taken into account. So that's payment from the church. So you can only find a clerk in holy orders, a clerk, a monk, a whatever, based on the money they have from secular purposes. If they're getting money from the church, you can't find them based on the money from the church, because that's church money and it's off limits. The Constitution is so short. It's so short. And yes, some of it is written in 19th century legalese, and I get it. 18th century legalese, which is worse. But, like, I had a guy once ask me when they put the words about the militia, well-organized militia, into the Second Amendment, and he didn't like it when I said 1789. No ville, basically villages, or person shall be compelled to make bridges at riverbanks, except those who from old were legally bound to do so. And I'm sure we're all very relieved to discover this. Nobody can be forced to build bridges.
You might want to, but you don't have to.
Right. Like, you could choose to make all the bridges you want, but they can't force you to. Which, I'm sure we're all relieved by. No sheriff, constable, coroner, or other royal bailiff shall hold lawsuits meant to be held by the royal justices. So, if it's a royal court, it's held by royal justices, and no one under that particular ranking is allowed to hold that court.
Now, basically, it's stay in your lane.
Basically, yeah. all counties, hundreds, wapentakes, and trithings. Areas smaller than a county that had its own court. The others, all three of those are basically synonyms. Shall remain at old rents and without any increase, except our domain manors, which is crown lands in this context. So he can't charge them higher rents. Just randomly. Unless you're getting your land directly from the crown, in which case, it's on you. If anyone holding a lay fief from the crown dies, and our sheriff or bailiff produces royal letters patent of summons for a debt owed to the crown, it shall be lawful for our sheriff or bailiff to seize and catalogue chattels found in the lay fief of the deceased to the value of that debt as assessed by law-worthy men. Nothing at all shall be removed from there until the debt is fully paid. The residue shall be left to the executors to fulfill the wish of the deceased. If there is no debt due to the crown, all the chattels shall go to the estate of the deceased except reasonable shares for his wife and children. So the crown is allowed to come in and take your stuff after you die, if you die in debt to the crown, before anybody else gets anything. And then after that part, if you owe other people, that's when the money gets taken out. Except for enough to support your widow and kids. Crown gets first bite at the apple. If any free man dies intestate, which is without a will, his chattels shall be distributed by his nearest kinsfolk and his friends under supervision of the church, except that the rights of his debtors shall be maintained. So if you don't leave a will, your stuff goes to your nearest family and your friends, with the church looking in to make sure, everything is fair, hopefully. But you've got to pay your debtors first. Well, your friends and family have to pay your debtors first. You're dead. No constable or other royal bailiff shall take corn, which in this case is just grain, because corn as we think of it is a New World food, or other provisions from any man without an immediate cash payment unless the seller permits postponement of this. You can't just confiscate people's grain. You've got to pay cash then and there unless the seller agrees to let you pay them later. And that is the royal. The crown can't just take people's grain. The crown has to pay for the grain that they're, or other provisions that they are taking.
And that's because I may be remembering something. Wasn't there like a like the peasants or the serfs had the like 10% of their grain to their lords?
Yeah. Oh yeah. No. As a serf, you owed a certain amount of your produce to the lord, and so on and so forth. This is one of the only ones that it's actually considered to apply to serfs as well as everyone else. Very few of these provisions apply to serfs. This one is considered to. You can't just take grain from a serf, even if you're a royal bailiff. It's one thing if it's their payment and they work royal lands. It's another thing entirely if you just, are hungry. No constable shall compel any knight to give money instead of castle guard, which is the requirement to guard your lord's castle as part of your rent, if the knight is willing to undertake the guard himself or to supply another responsible man to do it. If he cannot do it himself for any reasonable cause. Further, a knight taken or sent on military service shall be excused castle guard in proportion to the time he was on this service. So, one of your duties as a knight was to guard the castle of your liege lord, the person ahead of, above you. And they weren't allowed to say, well, instead of guarding the castle, give us money. If you're willing to guard the castle or send someone to do it for you if, like, you've broken your leg or whatever. Reasonable cost. Maybe you're just old. You don't want to guard the castle yourself, but you can send someone to do the job for you who is responsible for doing it. What's more, let's say your lord follows the king on one of his doomed French campaigns and requires you to go with him. He can't then make you spend time guarding the castle for how long you were his knight while you were off fighting this war. You gotta pick one, fighting the war, guarding the castle. No sheriff or royal bailiff or other person shall take the horses or carts of any free man for transport duty except with agreement from the said free man. You can agree to let them take your horse and cart, or, transport them yourself, presumably, but they can't just confiscate your horse and carts for transportation. Neither we nor our bailiffs shall take for our castles or for any other of our works wood which is not ours, except with agreement from the owner of that timber. A lot of lands were still forest in England at the time. And if you owned forest, the king couldn't just come and take your wood to build things, or, mostly this is about building things. If he needed timbers for his new castle, either he got them off his own land or he paid you. He couldn't just take it.
You killed a deer in the king's forest.
Well, yeah. The rights of common people to eat get really complicated in ways that they really shouldn't have. But the whole point of a lot of the king's deer and what have you rules were, well, the king might want to have fun hunting someday, so you can't eat deer. We will not hold the lands of those who have been convicted of felony beyond 1 year and 1 day. Then the land shall be returned to the lords of those fiefs. So, if you've been convicted of murder, they can't keep your land for longer than 1 year and a day. After that time, it's got to be returned to the lord over you, whoever that lord is. And I mean, if it's the king, well, then it's his land anyway. But that gives, the lord will be getting the revenues again at some point that you were paying them for those lands. Henceforth, all kittles, big stationary things to catch fish that might be a problem for navigation. Technically, the term is fish weir, but I suspected that not everybody would know what a fish weir was. So, shall be removed from the Thames, the Medway, and throughout all England except along the sea coast. They're going to make the rivers navigable. You can catch fish on the sea coast in big stationary things. You can't have big stationary things where boats might like to go up a river.
So no river fishing.
You can fish from a river, but you can't have... Basically, there are these giant wicker things that fish can get into but not out of. And because they're big and stationary, it's kind of a problem if you're trying to, move a boat past it. Because it takes up enough of the river to cause a problem. Mm-hmm. You fish all you want to using, a net or a hook and a line or what have you, but a big fish weir is right out.
So no big money-making profit fishing in the rivers.
I mean, you could do big money-making profit fishing if you have, for example, a fish pond, which was a fairly common thing in those days. You build a pond on your land and you stock it with fish, and as the fish get big, you take them out and sell them.
Well, that's still not the rivers.
Yeah, you can't do it on the rivers. You cannot do large-scale fishing on the river that requires something stationary in place.
Well, the thing about I think a lot of the fish we eat now are ocean fish. There's very few river fish that we sell and eat at all.
Yeah, but a lot of the fish eaten in those days were river fish or lake fish.
Except maybe salmon. Salmon. I know we catch salmon in the river or catch them in the ocean.
Salmon has a life cycle where it goes from freshwater into saltwater. We have a lot of salmon around here. It's a whole thing. But trout are freshwater. Carp are freshwater. Catfish are freshwater. There are freshwater eels that were very popular in those days. I don't know a lot about, the fish they ate in 12th century England. But there were a lot of river fish that they ate, and you could still eat them. You just had to, not impede.
Catch them very like one at a time, or catch them very briefly. Yeah. And we're I don't know if boating rights were a thing back then around the country. Like now, we have like 200 miles outside the country borders where you can legally fish.
The thing with fishing rights in those days was it was largely about the quality of your vessel and the fact that there was no refrigeration. So you didn't go too far out to sea simply because, if you've got a hold full of fish and you're 3 days from land, that's going to be kind of gross by the time you get to port. Large scale fishing, large scale deep sea fishing, there was cod, certainly, and you pack cod in salt. But a lot of the other fish that we eat a lot of today just weren't, either because, they didn't live in waters near England. I don't think they ate a lot of tilapia. Or else, if it wasn't relatively close to shore, they had a hard time getting it home before it spoiled. The writ called, and I don't know how to pronounce this, I'm sorry, Precipe, I guess, basically a do-it-or-else writ, in the future shall not be issued to anyone regarding any tenement whereby a free man might lose the right of trial in his own lord's court. So you can't put out a writ that says, you're going to do this thing, or else I'm going to punish you, if it doesn't have a recourse. Where you can't say, no, but there was a good reason, I'm going to take this to court. Everybody has a right to trial, basically. I mean, free men, but yes. I translated the verbiage into stuff that I thought would make better sense. There shall be one measure of wine, of ale, and of corn, namely the London quarter, throughout our whole realm. There shall also be one width of cloth, whether dyed, russet, or halberget, no one is sure what russet and helberget are. Like, we know russet is a color, but we don't know if that's what they meant by it. That is 2 Ls, which is a measure that varied by location, was 45 inches in England, 37 inches in Scotland, 27 inches in Flanders. Since this is England, we're going to assume 2 Ls, so 90 inches. Within the selvages, which is the long end of the fabric. If you buy a piece of fabric, there's the cut end. When you say, I want 2 yards of this, they cut one end of it and that end, frays. But if you look at a piece of fabric that's fresh off the bolt, there's 2 long edges that don't unravel, and those are the selvages. It's a sewing term.
Was Flanders the only? Was Flanders the only? Was that the only land in France we still owned, or was that another one?
Flanders is in Belgium. Actually,
Okay.
It's in the Low Countries, but it was a big trading center. It was a lot of our wool trade, a lot of English wool trade went through Flanders. And wool was a huge export for England in those days. So Flanders was vitally important to English trade. Yeah, I can knit a giant tangle of yarn, which is coincidentally what I can crochet, but I will believe you that it is a knit stitch, Lil. Let weights also be standardized similarly. This is standardizing weights and measures. And while this particular system is not still in place, obviously, especially because you can buy fabric in multiple widths. But you none of them are 2 Ls, actually. Closest you get is 2 Flanders Ls, because you can buy 60-inch, well, it's 58 these days, inch wide fabric. But there is the idea that if it's all the same measurement throughout the country, that's better for trade. Nothing shall be paid or taken in future for a writ of inquisition of life or limbs. Instead, it shall be given free of charge and not denied. Stupid English sheep. So you can't, I think this basically, you can't, torture people into giving you things. I'm not 100% sure what this one is. You can't force people to sign away their right of life and limbs, I think. If a man holds crown land by fee farm, which is just paying cash rent, by sockage, paying for land with services other than night service, so spinning would presumably be a form of sockage, or by burgage, which is rent for houses in town, and also holds land of another lord for night service, we will not have, by reason of that fee farm, sockage, or burgage, the wardship of his heir or of such land he holds of the other lord's fief, nor shall we have wardship of that fee farm, sockage, or burgage, unless the fee farm owes night service. We will not have the wardship of a man's heir, nor of land that the man holds through night service to someone else, because of any small sergeantry that he may hold from the crown for the service of providing to us knives, arrows, or the like. This is 12th century legal speak, so I'm going to have to kind of stumble through this one. I think it means that the crown is not going to accept wardship of an heir or similar when they owe two different kinds of payment for things. Like, if you have a house in town that you're paying for, and for a different lord you owe knight service, they're not even touching the whole thing. And they're not going to take wardship of somebody or their land or what have you, because you know, make the crown knives and arrows and things. I think. In future, no bailiff shall place a man on trial upon his own unsupported words without credible witnesses being produced to support his word. This is one of the ones that is still in place. This is one of the ones that's actually important. Because this is saying a bailiff has to have probable cause. A bailiff has to have witnesses and evidence and can't just say, well, I saw this man steal a pig and therefore he stole a pig and you all have to trust me.
Glad that's still relevant today.
Yeah, well, I'm going with pigs because pigs were a fairly common animal in those days for a lot of reasons.
Yep. Good thing we can't run people off the street today and accuse them of stuff.
Yeah, I have to admit, as I was making these slides, every once in a while I'd get to one and just sigh. We haven't even gotten to the worst of those yet. We're just like, oh, Magna Carta, you sweet summer child. But this is one of the starts in English law of the idea of, you know, evidence-based trials. No freeman shall be arrested or imprisoned or dispossessed, or outlawed or exiled or in any other way harmed, nor will we proceed against him or send others to do so, except according to the lawful sentence of his peers and according to the common law. And let's all sigh again, shall we? Now, it does say freemen, so they could still, throw serfs in prison for no good reason. But, yeah, you have to follow the rules of the court. Really, we promise. That's a whole thing. Hi, Kentucky Atheist. So this was another one where I made the slide and just took a minute. Because, yeah. To no one we will sell, to no one will we refuse or delay right or justice. So, yeah. Yeah. Like, this is the kind of thing that should be, emblazoned in very large letters on a courthouse wall somewhere. And probably is, honestly. All merchants, this one is less depressing, so, we're moving on. All merchants may leave or enter England in safety and security. They may stay and travel throughout England by road or by water, free from all illegal tolls, which you'd have to hope everybody would be free from illegal tolls, but anyway, in order to buy and...
What's the difference between an illegal toll and a legal toll?
Presumably an illegal toll is just somebody shaking you down on the road, but if it means more than that, I don't know. In order to buy and sell according to the ancient and rightful customs. This is, except in time of war, those merchants who are from the land at war with us. So, if you're French, this may not apply to you. And if such merchants are found in our land at the beginning of the war, they shall be detained without injury to their bodies or goods until information is received by us or by our chief justiciar about in what way are treated our merchants thence found in the land at war with us. If our men are safe there, the others shall be safe in our land. Trade was really important. It always has been for, thousands of years. And England didn't produce a lot of the things that the English people wanted. And England produced things a lot of other countries wanted. So trade between England and the continent was really important.
It's like it's still important today, and charging people to ship things to your land might be bad for some reason.
Yeah, no, charging people to ship things to your land is not a good idea. But somehow people are convinced that it is. And this isn't about tariffs because that's a whole other, this is basically just about how you treat people. Merchants have the right to travel around buying and selling. And if you're at war with another country and you find that country's merchants in your territory, you hold them not like in prison, but
make sure they're not a spy.
Yeah. Well, make sure how your people are being treated. And if the other country's treating your people well, you treat their people well. And I would imagine there was a certain amount of checking to see if they're spying. But a lot of it is more hold them hostage for the safety of your own people. Because if your people, the implication here is if your men are not safe in that other country, these people are not safe in yours. So, it's a little bit of vicious medieval diplomacy. It shall be lawful in future for anyone keeping loyalty to the crown to leave our kingdom and to return safely and securely by land and by water. This is except in time of war, when men may go only in the public interest for some short period. This excludes always those imprisoned or outlawed in accordance with the law of the realm, natives of any country at war with us, and merchants who shall be treated as previously stated. This is right to travel. You are allowed to leave England. You can leave England and you can come back safely. I mean, there's only so much of that they could control, in as much as weather was a whole thing. Look at the White Ship, which, sank and started the anarchy. And you couldn't control how people were going to act on the continent, but you as a person, because it says anyone, notice this is not about free men, this is not even about men, this says anyone. Now, in practice, that didn't include serfs because serfs weren't allowed to go places, but, whatever. As long as you were loyal to the crown, you could travel, unless there was wartime or, other reasons. But it also meant that as long as you didn't violate rules, they kind of didn't care if you were from another country. Because it does specify natives of any country at war with us, which assumes that natives of other countries, as long as they're loyal to the crown, can come and go at will. So, yeah. If anyone holding of some escheat So escheat means things that revert to the government if someone dies intestate, but I don't understand what that means here. I am not a lawyer. I am certainly not a 12th century lawyer.
Gasp!
I wouldn't be allowed to be a 12th century lawyer. Such as the honor of Wallingford, Nottingham, Bologna, Lancaster. I love Bologna, just kind of randomly thrown in the middle of all these very English places. Or of other escheats which are in our hands and our baronies, dies, his heir shall give only the relief and service to us that he would have done to the baron if that barony had been in the baron's hands. We shall hold the escheat in the same manner in which the baron held it. Yeah, no, it's 800 years old, and again, we still haven't gotten to the most depressing one. So, yeah. But this one is basically saying, if you're living in some area, I'm pretty sure these are all places that King John was controlling at the time, even though they weren't his own personal property, then you will be treated by him as you would be treated by the Baron if the Baron were in place at the end of age. I think that's what this means. Men who dwell outside the forest henceforth need not come before justiciars of the forest, following a general summons, unless they are named in a plea or are sureties for any person or persons arrested for forest offenses.
Do people
Forest offenses is my new band name. It is my favorite phrase in the entire Magna Carta.
Do people dwell inside the forest?
Yeah, if you don't dwell in the forest, they can't make you come into the forest for general summons. I don't know why they would.
Who lives in the forest?
Not many, well, foresters, presumably. Foresters, woodsmen, and so forth. But I guess they can't make you come into the forest unless there's some court case that you're involved in the forest. I don't understand this one, but again, I present you forest offenses.
I guess this is when people. I guess this is when we still had forests out there in the world.
Yeah, well, I mean, we got lots of forests here, but they chopped them all down in England to make ships. So we will appoint as justices, constables, sheriffs, or bailiffs only those who know the law of the realm and who wish to observe it well. Friends, I present to you the most depressing clause of the Magna Carta.
Know the law.
Only those who know the law of the realm and who wish to observe it well. And I want you to notice constables, bailiffs, those are law enforcement officials. This isn't just judges. This is, we are not going to put petty thugs on the streets to beat people up or, God forbid, shoot them because we are only going to put these people into these jobs if they respect, know, and follow the law. Without this clause, most of the rest of this doesn't matter. I would argue none of this matters without this clause. Because, the thing about not selling justice doesn't apply if the judge doesn't care about not selling justice. If the sheriff doesn't care about the law, he will make you build whatever damn bridge he wants. If the constable doesn't care about the law, he will haul you into that forest. Without this clause, everything falls apart. And I don't think this clause technically still has the force of law in the UK today. Like, I'm not 100% sure on that one way or another. But it's implicit in so much law around the world. And the idea that anyone would ignore it is horrifying. Like, this was almost beyond sighing. This was almost, I have to take a cry break now time. Because who wish to observe it well. Which means that in one sense at least, King John was a better ruler. Do you know how bad you have to be as a ruler to have people wishing for King John? So yeah, good gentles, I present the most depressing clause of the Magna Carta. I'm going to move on now because I don't want to start crying. All barons who have founded abbeys for which they hold charters from the kings of England or for which they have long-standing possession shall have the custody of them when vacant, as they should have. And I don't think that's the intended emphasis, but I'm going to do it anyway because it's funny and we need to laugh.
Abbeys, is that like where the monks live?
Yes, yes. It used to be fairly common for nobles to found, it wasn't always monks, it was sometimes nuns, but to found religious colonies, let's call it. Because they were pious, because they wanted to be seen as pious, because they
especially
wanted to
if you have a youngest son or youngest daughter end up there.
Or, a widowed sister or who was too old to marry off to someone else usually. Or, you wanted something from the church. There were a lot of reasons to found an abbey. And if you just run out of monks, you get the abbey back. It's fine. And that's, as they should have. It's fine. I don't really care. But I just love that final clause. As they should have. Yes, they wanted to get out of hell free card. A particularly, how to phrase it, sinful, I guess is the best way. A particularly sinful lord would be more inclined to found an abbey, or a particularly pious one, to be fair. Like, if you really strongly, passionately believed in it, yes, you would found an abbey because, praise Jesus. But also, if you were less so, but didn't want to burn in hell for all eternity, you'd found an abbey and have the monks pray for your soul. So, yeah. All forests that have been created in our reign shall forthwith be disafforested, and similar course shall be followed for riverbanks that we've made preserves during our reign. So this is, we were talking earlier about the king's forests and the king wanting to hunt and so forth. And this was the patches of forest that he proclaimed as king's forests or rivers that were king's preserves, were basically just, this land is mine now. It's not like the current sense of preserve. I live not that far from a bird sanctuary. And that's not the kind of thing we're talking here. We're talking place where only the king and his friends are allowed to hunt or fish.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So he had basically stolen land, is what this is. And now he's giving it back. All evil customs, which is another great phrasing, relating to forests and warrens, foresters, warreners.
Question though.
Huh?
You should give it back. Like, so this is like the end of feudalism, kind of, because technically it wasn't all the
Feudalism would go for quite a while yet. Feudalism really only starts to fall apart in the 1340s.
Okay.
And I mean in France considerably after that.
I was wondering because you said it was the end of, because you said he took the land, but technically all the king's land, he's renting it out to the barons, or renting it out to the dukes,
It's
renting out to the
land
barons.
that he personally took.
Okay.
If it was owned by the crown, if his brother had made it a private forest, well, then it was still his. Or his father, or, so on back. But the stuff that he personally had done, and they were still going to complain to him about.
Okay.
All evil customs relating to forests and warrens, foresters, warreners, sheriffs and their officers, riverbanks and their wardens shall immediately be investigated in each county by 12 sworn knights of the same county, chosen by the honest men of the county. The evil customs shall, within 40 days of said inquest, be completely and irrevocably abolished. This is provided always that we are probably first informed, or our justiciar if we should not be in England. So, if a forester is violating his oaths and doing things he's not supposed to, 12 sworn knights of the county get to do something about it. You can get 12 knights to hold a court. Then you can abolish whatever evil thing is being done. Well, actually, it's causation is reversed there. It's not just in time for the plague. It's the plague basically brought about the end of serfdom and true feudalism in England. The changes in social structure in England ended the system of serfdom in all realistic senses. So this is really kind of getting into the start of the concept of a jury, because it's 12 knights. Why is it 12? I don't know, but that's the number that they chose. But you have to tell the king first, or his chief justice, or whatever, if the king's not in England. And this makes a lot of provisos for the king not being in England because he might be in France. Also, John said he was going on crusade, which he never did, but everybody's pretty sure he was using it as a cover for all kinds of shenaniganery. So that's going to be relevant in a little bit here. He took the cross, as they said, and then did nothing with it. We will immediately restore all hostages and charters which were delivered to us by Englishmen as security for peace or for faithful service. If you bribed the king so that he wouldn't come after you, he's giving you your bribe back. So, that's nice. And it isn't just bribes, because, hostages, that's messy stuff. We will entirely remove from their bailiwicks the kinsmen of a list of people that I don't feel like naming, who were relevant in ways to things that John did that the barons didn't like. Because it's all 12th century politics and nobody cares. This is one that's not still enforced because it is only very specifically relevant to what was going on, right then. Though I do like the "and all their brood" at the end. As soon as peace is restored, so when the barons back down, we will banish from the kingdom all foreign-born knights, crossbowmen, their attendants, and mercenaries who have come with horses and arms to the kingdom's detriment. Basically, when the barons stop threatening him, he will remove the people he's brought over to protect himself. Like I said, this is a peace treaty. And this is him saying, okay, I'm not going to threaten you with these foreign-born soldiers, for lack of a better term, when you guys lay down your arms. If, without the lawful judgment of his peers, a man has been dispossessed of his lands, castles, franchises, or his rights, or had them removed by us, we will at once restore these to him. If a dispute arises over this, the dispute shall be decided by the judgment of the 25 barons referred to below in the clause for securing the peace. Moreover, in all cases where possessions have been disseised or removed from anyone without the lawful judgment of his peers, by our father King Henry or our brother King Richard, and which are retained by us or which are held by others under our warranty, we will have the usual respite period allowed to crusaders, unless a lawsuit has been started or we had ordered an enquiry before we took the cross. However, as soon as we return from our expedition, which I'm going to note he never left on, or if by chance we abandon it, yes he did, we shall immediately grant full justice. So, if somebody has had their possessions removed without lawful judgment by Henry II or Richard I or by John, he will restore them. Just as soon as he gets back from that crusade. Which he's going on any minute, guys, seriously. But if he abandons the crusade, then, but I don't know how they'd have determined if he abandoned it or not. So, basically, there's a lot of land that the crown no longer had because it was seized without just cause. We shall have the same respite and the same manner in rendering justice concerning the disafforestation or retention of those forests, which Henry our father and Richard our brother afforested, and concerning guardianship of lands under the fief of another, that is, the guardianships we had up to now because of a knight's fee someone else held from us, and with abbeys founded in fiefs other than our own, in which the lord of the fief claims to have a right. When we return from our expedition, or if we abandon it, we will at once grant full justice to complaints about these things. This is actually the previous clause too, but it's a very long one. And it's saying anything. It's not just the lands we seize. It's if we set up a private forest, and this includes Henry and Richard, or somebody founded an abbey in lands that weren't theirs. We will deal with that. Just any minute now when we get back from the crusade. Seriously, guys. No one shall be arrested or imprisoned on the appeal of a woman for the death of anyone except her husband. So, let's say I witness a murder. Unless it were my husband's, and I don't technically have a husband, I can't get anyone arrested for it because I am a woman. This may be the clause that has aged worst in the entire document. Even the ones with the Jews have some good things in them. This one is just sexism for the point of sexism. All fines rendered to us unjustly and against the law of the land, and all amercements made unjustly and against the law of the land, shall be entirely remitted, or else the matter settled by the decision of an majority of the 25 barons, or all of them, mentioned below in the clause for securing the peace. This decision shall be made together with Stephen, Archbishop of Canterbury, if he can be present, and such others as he may wish to bring with him. If the bishop cannot be present, business shall nevertheless proceed without him. This is provided always that, if any one or more of the 25 barons are involved in a similar action, they are removed for this particular judgment and are replaced by others. The replacements will be sworn in as a substitute only for this business after being selected by the rest of the 25. So, if you've been unjustly fined by the crown, there's a list of 25 barons that we're going to get to who make the decision about whether it was unjust or not, and if they agree, you get your money back. And if the issue is about one of the other barons, he recuses himself, and the other 24 pick a guy to replace him for that particular hearing. So, yeah.
So what does that mean exactly?
So, okay, we've talked about amercement, which is the arbitrary fines, and how that's illegal. So if you claim to the crown that you have been unfairly fined or arbitrarily fined, and you would like your money back now, please. There's a list of 25 barons that we're going to get to, and I'm not going to read their names because no one cares, who would hear your case. And they would do so with the Archbishop of Canterbury if he could be there, and anyone he felt like bringing, apparently, which that's a fun image. And if a majority or, all of them agreed that you were owed, the crown would have to give you your money back. If one of those barons felt, for example, he had been unjustly fined, or were in some other way involved in a case like that, he would step aside for the purposes of that specific hearing. And the other guys would nominate someone to take his place for that specific hearing. And you would still get, that guy would still get a trial that involved the 25 men and the Archbishop of Canterbury if he's there.
Okay.
Further, where a Welshman was deprived or dispossessed of anything, because Wales was not technically part of the kingdom at this point. Wales is a complicated situation right now, and I don't have the history background to fully understand what's going on with Wales like ever. Where a Welshman was deprived or deprived or dispossessed of anything without the lawful judgment of his peers in England or in Wales by our Father King Henry or our Father King Richard, and which is retained by us or which is held by others under our warranty, we will have the usual respite period allowed to crusaders, unless a lawsuit has been started or we had ordered an enquiry before we took the cross. However, as soon as we return from our expedition, or if by chance we abandon it, we shall immediately grant full justice according to the laws of Wales and the said regions. So it's basically the same thing, but he's saying it'll follow Welsh law as to whether this was fair or unfair. Which is a little surprising, but, We will immediately return the son of Llywelyn, gotta love Welsh, and all the hostages of Wales, and the charters handed over to us as a security for peace. This is battling with Wales stuff.
Yeah, this is before John's grandson completely took over Wales.
There was just a lot of battling between England and Wales at this point. And then the Tudors got in, and there's now Welsh blood in the royal bloodlines. So that's nice. We will return the sisters and hostages of Alexander, King of Scotland, his liberties and his rights, in the same manner as we shall do towards our other barons of England, unless it ought to be otherwise according to the charters that we hold from his father William, formerly King of Scotland. This matter shall be determined by the judgment of his peers in our court. Because they were battling with Scotland, and unification there would take until James the First and Sixth inherited the throne from Elizabeth I. So that's an even longer stretch of time before the whole thing with Scotland got sorted. Moreover, all these previously described customs and liberties which we have granted shall be maintained in our kingdom as far as it concerns our own relations toward our men. Let these customs and liberties be observed similarly by all of our kingdom, by clergy as well as by laymen, in their relations towards their men. So it's basically, these laws don't just apply to the king. Barons are expected to handle things with their knights and so forth in the same way. And knights are supposed to, it goes down the pyramid. Everybody is supposed to more or less treat others according to the law. Since for God, for the improvement of our kingdom, and to better allay the discord arisen between us and our barons, we have granted all these concessions, and wishing that the concessions be enjoyed in their entirety with firm endurance forever, and that's a leftover copy error, don't mind me, we give and grant to the barons the following security. Namely, that the barons choose any 25 barons of the kingdom they wish, who must with all their might observe and hold, and cause to be observed, the peace and liberties we have granted and confirmed to them by this our present charter. Then if we, our chief justiciar, our bailiffs, or any of our officials, offend in any respect against any man, or break any of the articles of the peace or of this security, and the offense is notified to 4 of the said 25 barons, the 4 shall come to us, or to our chief justiciars, we are absent from the kingdom, to declare the transgression and petition that we make amends without delay. So, let's say the king appoints someone to an office who doesn't care about the law. Well, if 4 of the barons notice that, then they can go to the king, or if he's away from the country, his chief justiciar, and say, hey, that guy over there doesn't care about the law. And, they can petition that the amends are made. And then we get to the next slide. And if we, or in our absence abroad, the Chief Justice, have not corrected the transgression within 40 days, reckoned from the day on which the defense was declared to us, or the Chief Justice if we are out of the realm, the 4 barons mentioned before shall refer the matter to the rest of the 25 barons. Together with the community of the whole land, they shall then distrain and distress us in every way possible, namely by seizing castles, lands, possessions, and in any other way they can, saving only our own person and those of the queen and our children, until redress has been obtained in their opinion, and when amends have been made, they shall obey as before. So we're going to just do this paragraph right now. If the king breaks the law and doesn't fix it, the barons are allowed to just start taking his stuff, including land. They can't take him, they can't take the queen, they can't take his kids, but they can just start confiscating everything else in the kingdom they want to if he's not obeying the law. Whoever in the country wants to may take an oath to obey the orders of the 25 barons for the execution of all the previously mentioned matters, and, with the barons, to distress us to the utmost of his power. We publicly and freely give permission to everyone who wishes to take this oath, and we shall never forbid anyone from taking it. Indeed, all those in the land who are unwilling to swear this oath, or to this oath, we shall by our command compel them to swear it. This means everyone in the country is obligated to make the king follow the law.
Mm.
Yeah. Now, this was the first part of the Magna Carta to get repealed. I'm sure you're shocked. There was a new one that got put out under, I think it was Henry III, that is missing several sections, and this is one of them. But the idea here is one of the reasons that the Puritans became so fond of the Magna Carta. Because under this version of the Magna Carta, it is your obligation as a citizen of, well, subject, because they don't do citizens there, as a subject of England, to make the king follow the law. If he doesn't follow the law, it is not just your right or privilege, but your obligation to make things as difficult as for him as possible until he follows the law. You can't hurt him, you can't hurt his wife, you can't hurt his kids. Everything else is fair game. Taking his stuff, that's fair game. Seizing his land, that's fair game. Seizing his castles, I mean, good luck to you, but it's fair game. You can make his life miserable until he does what he is supposed to do. And you're supposed to. And this is possibly the most fascinating part of the Magna Carta, which is, again, why it got repealed almost immediately. But it puts this is one place where it is unique, because it puts a balance on the monarch unlike any that had ever been seen before. You had to make sure your monarch was following the rules. And if they weren't, you had to do what was in your power to just needle them until they did.
And was this why when later King Charles I decided a divine right of king, they're like, nope.
Yeah. This is the point in English history in which the divine right of kings basically just dies. And again, this got repealed, but the idea is there. The idea that the monarch is not above the law is, for the first time in English history, on, parchment or vellum, but the point is it's written down. You can't say it's on paper because it's, I think, 1215, but it's written down, and he puts his seal to it. He doesn't sign it because signing is not really a thing from those days. He put the royal seal on it as, yeah, here's what I will do. Here's what you get to do if I don't do what I'm supposed to.
And no king and ruler ever decided to do that anymore.
Yeah. If any one of the 25 barons dies or leaves the country, or is in any other matter incapacitated, so the previously mentioned provisions cannot be undertaken, the remaining barons of the 25 shall choose another in his place as they think fit, who shall be duly sworn in like the rest. If there is any disagreement amongst the 25 barons on any matter presented to them, or if some of them are unwilling or unable to be present, what the majority of those present ordain in command shall be held as fixed and established, exactly as if all 25 had consented in this. The said 25 barons shall swear to faithfully observe all the aforesaid articles, and will do all they can to ensure that the articles are observed by others. And we shall procure nothing from anyone, either personally or indirectly, whereby any part of these concessions and liberties might be revoked or diminished, and if any such thing has been procured, let it be void and null, and we shall never make use of it ourselves or through someone else. So if one of the barons can't do the job, they pick a new guy. If some of them can't or won't be there to make the decisions, the majority of the ones who are there are good enough. The barons are swearing to follow the rules established under Magna Carta. The king promises he's not going to get anything that would be against the rules that are set forth here. So this is how the whole thing is going to be enforced. And the king's responsibility towards seeing it done. And all the ill will, hatreds, and bitterness that have arisen between us and our people, clergy, and laity from the date of the quarrel, we have completely forgiven and pardoned to everyone. Moreover, we have fully forgiven, and, as far as it concerns us, pardoned all transgressions occasioned by the said quarrel between Easter and the 16th year of our reign, and the restoration of peace to all, both clergy and laymen, and completely forgiven as far as this applies to us. Additionally, we have had letters patent drawn up for the barons over the seals of blah, 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 blah. The letters patent concern this security and the concessions previously stated. So, nobody is going to be imprisoned or in any other way held responsible for a little light rebellion up to that point. He's making no promises after the peace has been settled, but if you had been involved in the rebellion, you were now pardoned. And he forgave you totally, completely. Trust him. And certain people have had letters drawn up to promise this. Thus, we wish and we firmly ordain that the English Church shall be free, and that men in our kingdom shall have and keep all these previously determined liberties, rights, and concessions, well and in peace, freely and quietly, in their fullness and integrity for themselves and their heirs, and from us and our heirs, in all things and all places forever, as is previously described here. In other words, this isn't just about John. I mean, in practice it is. But in theory, he's saying this will apply forever. In practice, not so much, and not just because some of it is no longer relevant. But in theory, this is intended to grant these rights forever. And put these responsibilities on the king forever.
I'll get to that in a second when we're done.
Mm-hmm. An oath has been sworn on the one hand by us and on the other by the barons that all the aforesaid provisions shall be observed in good faith and without evil intent. Given under our hand, the above named and many others being witnesses, in the meadow which is called Runnymede between Windsor and Staines, on the 15th day of June in the 17th year of our reign. You have to still visit the meadow in Runnymede. There's a little bit of debate about exactly where the whole thing happened, but Runnymede is still there. So now what? While later monarchs would issue variations on the Magna Carta over the centuries, it was not considered a terribly important document. Until the Stuart dynasty, where it was started to claim that it protected the freedoms of the common man. Only 3 of its clauses remain in British law today. However, it is something of an ideal in English common law, and it is a symbol, if nothing else.
Now, you mentioned earlier that John later tried to get out of this thing, or or trade
No, there
pellet?
was I think it was under Henry III. It was somewhat a few
Yeah,
down the line.
yeah. I did. I could get to that because later on, Henry III, as a minor, had to obey this because he was a minor, and
Yeah.
so that really confirmed it by then. But I think I read somewhere John tried to get the Pope to say, "Hey, can I get out of this, please?"
Yeah. And the Pope shot it down, as I recall. It was like, no, you put your seal on it. That's on you, pal. And there was another version that was put out in like 1280 something, I want to say. I don't remember exactly.
Would I
And
have
there's
been
been.
would I have been Henry III or would I have been Edward the First?
I don't remember. Not my era. And there have been several revisions over the centuries. This is the first Magna Carta. And some of the more progressive sections were the first ones to go.
So why
Because
do
of course
people go on?
Well, I just said because of course they were.
Yeah. So why do people today think that this was like the grandfather or great grandfather of the laws today, the Constitution and stuff?
Here's where we blame the Victorians. The Victorians got a weird thing for the Magna Carta. The Puritans were the ones who really started with the idea of, it protects the rights of the common man and defies tyranny. And I think it does defy tyranny to a certain extent, but only a certain extent, because serfdom was still a thing, and most of this didn't apply to 90% of the country.
It applied to the nobles.
Right. If you were even like just a carpenter or a merchant, a lot of this didn't apply to you. But the Puritans were fairly good at ignoring the things they didn't want to talk about. And they declared that, no, it had been intended to apply to everyone all along, and even where it didn't, clearly you can see the seeds of this applies to everyone. And there was certainly the appeal of the section that said, hey, the king doesn't get to be a tyrant. And they used it as a fairly strong argument against Charles I and his divine right of kings. And it kind of got shuffled back down a little bit in the subsequent, in the Restoration and the century or two following that. But then the Victorians got a hold of it and started to idolize it.
Because by that time, the king, I don't know, was the king's power by the Victorian time. The king's power had Parliament and stuff, and the Tudors and the
by the time Victoria was queen, you had not just the House of Lords, but the House of Commons, and they had pretty much all of the power. And I won't say that the monarch was purely a figurehead, but she was awful damn close.
It was getting, yeah, it was like, but it was getting. I think that by that time, the king or queen still officially picked the prime minister. It wasn't until like the 1900s that was officially elected the position. But
and I mean, there are certain things that Charles could technically do as king right now that no monarch has done for at least a century, because they don't want to risk seeing what happens if it doesn't work. But I think the main issue here is that most of the Victorians didn't read the goddamn thing. They got it in their heads that it was this great document limiting the powers of the king, which it is. I mean, it does limit the powers of the king, but they didn't read it to discover what powers were being limited and against whom. So I think the idea is, well, this is the root of English government, which is not entirely true, but it's also not entirely wrong. This is the first time that certain parts of English government were written into law, and it's worth noting that the British still don't have a written constitution. And some of them will tell you, well, we have the Magna Carta. The Magna Carta is not a constitution. It's a peace treaty. And there are some, in some cases, quite literally revolutionary ideals in it. But mostly it's the king doesn't get to take power away from these other powerful people. Arguably, it's establishing England as an oligarchy. Which would have horrified the Victorians who idolized the document, but it's arguably true. But the Victorians didn't want to think about that kind of thing. They wanted to think about how cool it was that they had a document going back to the 13th century that limited the power of their king, whereas, the French had to behead theirs to get the same thing, and that didn't happen until, the 1790s.
But
superiority over the French does a lot in English history.
Well, technically, they beheaded their king too, but they got the king back eventually.
Yeah. Well, and also, even Charles had to concede that there were certain rights he didn't have. He was just salty about the whole thing and tried to take more rights than they wanted to let him. And yeah, whereas 90% of French kings would have been horrified if you suggested that peasants had a right to sneeze without permission. So I think jingoism is a fairly short answer to why the Victorians got to be in their bonnet about the Magna Carta.
So what's 3 things are still relevant today in Britain?
So there's the one about hold on, let me go back. Actually, I'm going to do it the easy way. Because, obviously, a lot of them don't matter. A lot of them really don't. So the freedom and rights of the English Church is one of them. The privileges of the City of London, and the right to trial by jury.
And that's the one that's still relevant. In the last one got pulled over to our laws.
Yeah, like we in the U.S. don't have to care about the rights of the English Church or the rights of the City of London. Though, to a certain extent, the idea of city and state government descends from that. But the right to trial by jury is the most important right descended from the Magna Carta. There are a couple of clauses that I think are more ideals than rights. And those are very, very important too, even if we're not observing them right now. But most of the document, no one cares. No one cares. I mean, the whole thing about certain members of a certain family are never going to hold office in England again, no one cares. A descendant of that guy could end up as Lord Mayor of London, and no one would care. He could end up as Prime Minister. No one, odds are pretty good, no one would know, much less care. I grant you people are still happy about not being forced to build bridges. That doesn't happen, so it's all good.
I think by this point, most of the bridges are built by now, hopefully.
Well, that's a whole different conversation. And most of this document is very, very specific to its time and place. Because most of this document is, here are specific grievances against John, with some residual grievances against Henry and Richard. Here's how we want these resolved. Now, I would argue that the idea that you can bring your leaders to the table and make them sit down with you and resolve your grievances is a very important one that still lingers from Magna Carta, but it's not technically in the document itself. Like, even the whole thing where you can take his land and whatever, that doesn't mean you can make him sit down at the table and agree with you. It means that, if he goes against the already established laws, you can take his stuff. Which is, again, fun to picture, but not... It does not have the force of law anywhere today.
Yeah, not relevant at all. Not relevant at all today.
No. Again, there's an argument to be made that there are certain things established in the Magna Carta as ideas that we still follow. There's an argument that it's giving Parliament its first form.
Again, Parliament being the Lords, nothing but the Commons.
Yeah, purely the House of Lords. There's no inkling of a House of Commons here. Not even, the non-noble freemen.
But
there wouldn't be.
It's a start.
Yeah. There wouldn't be true freedom to form your own government. In a sense, there arguably still isn't true freedom in the UK to form your own government because there's still a monarchy. But
So this one became a constitutional monarchy, or is that still later down the line?
Oh, that's way down the line. The king still held probably 80% of the power at the time. And he was expected to follow certain laws, but as long as he stayed within those laws, he could still get away with a hell of a lot. The biggest thing that it gave to what sketchy parliament they had based on it is the power of the purse, which was a thing very important to the barons. They didn't want John to tax them, the way you think of Prince John taxing people during the Robin Hood stories. Now, was King John taxing the poor people? No, not really. They didn't have any money. He was taxing the barons who did.
Yeah. Wasn't technically Robin Hood, wasn't he technically a baron or a former baron or lord or something?
Depends on which version of the story.
Okay.
Robin Hood is almost certainly just a fictional character.
Yeah, true, but I know some fiction he was a noble or something.
There are some versions of the story where he was a noble. There are some versions where he wasn't. There's a lot of different versions of what Robin was.
Of course, then again, even then, he that would have been during his during his brother's reign, so that this will apply anyways.
the outlawry there is a whole thing. But the point remains, if Robin Hood were the son of a forester or just a free peasant, the Magna Carta wouldn't have done a ton for him. But it did mean that he couldn't be forced to go fight in one of King John's wars by a baron who didn't want to send his men to fight in the war. Which is something.
Again, that started the downfall of feudalism, probably because before that the king granted you the land so he could fight for him.
Yeah, and the thing is you still had a certain obligation towards the king, but he had lost so many battles in France, so many battles,
and so much land in France,
and so much land, and the barons just weren't anymore. The barons were done. And when they wouldn't give him men, he wanted to charge money so he could hire mercenaries, and they were like, let's not. So these were I mean, I don't think they really cared about the people per se, but they could see the outcome of what was going to happen if this kept going. Because you can only send men to war for so long before it starts having a very bad effect on your country.
That's when you keep losing.
Yeah, you keep losing. You have less and less land, and the peasants are doing a lot of the dying, which means famine is likely. And the reason I went back to the anarchy to start this is that while that wasn't in living memory for a lot of people, it was definitely, stories your grandfather told you about how there was no food and no one left to work these fields because so many people had died in these stupid, pointless battles that didn't solve anything. And so the English lords didn't want to return to that. They knew that the system required a certain amount of attention. And with Richard ignoring England most of his reign, and again, I don't blame him for spending a certain amount of his reign in France. It's the crusade and the being held prisoner that would have frustrated me if I were English.
But that did give, with no ruler in the land, that gave the barons, some were in charge powers here,
Well, and there was a ruler, sort of, because John was acting as regent, and Eleanor was still around. So Eleanor had a certain amount of power in those days.
Mm-hmm.
But the barons did have more power while Richard was away. And between that and the anarchy, they kind of gotten used to having a certain amount of power. They didn't want an absolute ruler. They just didn't want total anarchy. This is about finding a compromise between those 2 points.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier at the beginning that this wasn't the first limit of the king's power.
No, there are documents going back. Oh gosh, I think the Code of Hammurabi actually put some limits on the king's power. There are documents going back a very long time limiting the powers of various monarchs. I forget where it was that I came across, that had an ongoing, somewhere in the Scandinavian countries, I think, had an ongoing thing very specifically limiting the power of their monarchs. And they redid it every once in a while, but they regularly had this thing for literally centuries, limiting the power of their monarchs.
And I think because of that, the Scandinavian countries and England are the few countries that still have their monarch because they limited their power.
Yeah. There are a couple of other places in Europe that still have monarchs, but it is mostly, the UK and Scandinavia. And it is in no small part because the idea of an absolute monarch went away very quickly. The reason the English throne survived the end of the 18th century was they were giving their people rights. It wasn't horrifically oppressive like France was at the time. There were several eras in European history that were, and now monarchies are falling.
Like France and later on the Tsar of Russia.
Yeah. About half of Europe lost their monarchies in the fallout of World War I. And the main reason the English throne survived that was, by then the throne was mostly a figurehead.
They're like, yeah, why not?
Yeah. So, there are in the UK what are called small r Republicans, which is people who want not a monarchy, but a republic. And fine, more power to them, as far as I'm concerned. But they are not going to have a violent overthrow of the monarchy anytime soon, because they don't have to. And no, it's not entirely because of the Magna Carta, but that is where its roots come from.
Yeah. So ultimately, what did you learn by studying all this past week or so?
Well, I learned that there are some words in the Magna Carta that nobody knows what they mean, and that was entertaining. I learned that there are some clauses in the Magna Carta that would be really nice if they were in the Constitution, too. I learned that Henry and Eleanor were even worse parents than I thought they were. Because I literally discovered this week the thing about how Henry was the one who first called him Lackland. That's bad parenting right there.
It's funny, as the youngest, you think he wouldn't get anything, but he got everything. He lost it all, but he got everything at the end.
Yeah. And that's just because,
Survivor.
Yeah. His brothers predeceased him, and, Richard didn't have any kids. That's the main reason John became king. And I learned that a document like this is use it or lose it. If you don't keep up with the rights that you have, they will be taken away from you. If you don't stand up for your rights and you let somebody else take them when they are not, when they are legally prevented from doing that, then they go away. And it can take centuries for them to come back. I learned that forestry crimes are a thing.
Again, I hope. Yeah. So again, I hope we don't have to. We learn a lesson in today's economy. here in
Yeah.
America.
I learned that women couldn't hold anyone responsible for killing anyone but their husband. It's depressing, but I learned it.
So not even their son.
Not even their son, just their husband, because presumably they could tell their husband to go tell the magistrate about the person who killed whoever else. Yeah.
So
I mean, it's an interesting document, but it's mostly a relic, is what I learned.
You said this was Latin, not Old English or Middle English.
Yeah, no, and I knew it was Latin because formal documents at the time were. And I appreciate why it was in Latin, but even if I spoke Latin, I would have looked at somebody else's translation because the combination of medieval Latin and medieval legal speak, I would have just been so far out of my depth. The idea that there were already in translation multiple words I didn't understand was kind of impressive to me. I'm not really used to that. Sometimes I have to look things up. And I would have looked up what the definition of an L was because I know it's a measure of length, but I didn't know exactly what it was. But the idea that there were words in that passage where they're like, oh, nobody knows. It's like, oh, okay, that's fine. That's fine.
So what's coming up on your Media Magpie you want to advertise?
Well, I am still steadfastly plowing through, finishing up the In Memoriam reels. I think I posted September yesterday. So those are on the Media Magpie's YouTube channel. And once I finish with those, I will finish the editing and I will post a depth of field with Dr. Dan Stern Cardinal, where we sit and talk movies and books about evolution and virology, which was a lot of fun. This month on Attention Must Be Paid has been Refugee Month. I've been covering people who were mostly in the La Marseillaise scene of Casablanca, who were themselves refugees. Admittedly, that includes, one of the guys who played one of the Germans, but still, there were a lot of actual refugees in that scene. And then on Celebrating the Living, I'm in the middle of, last week was Mike Myers, tomorrow is Tia Carrera, and next Sunday is Dana Carvey. So a little Wayne's World nostalgia for you Gen Xers. That's the big stuff.
See, as for me, next week Gillian will be back to talk about the always fun MCU Phase 3 and the 13 movies or 10 plus movies. 11.
I counted yesterday. I'm as far as Black Panther, so I think I will actually get it finished up this time.
Yeah. From Civil War to, surprisingly, it ends at Far From Home, which I think is, I don't know, that's weird, but technically that's Phase 3 still.
Mm-hmm.
We'll get to that next week. And then nothing's happening in 2 weeks from now yet, but in 3 weeks I'll be interviewing the Kentucky Atheist, and in 4 weeks we'll have our friend Lillian here as a guest. In 1 month's time. So looking forward to that. But until then, never stop learning. Enjoy the randomness. We will see you next time. Bye.
Bye.
Hey, thanks for watching my podcast or Let's Play. If you want to help support my channel, you can make a monthly or yearly pledge on Patreon, or just a one-time donation on Vimeo, PayPal, or Cash App. For those looking for something to wear, we have some shirts, hats, and other stylish things in our merch store. If you enjoy gaming, you can always follow and sub to me on Twitch. For those who don't want to give money, I have an Amazon and Steam wish list who can help the channel out. And of course, just liking, leaving a comment, and sharing this video helps more than you can imagine. And always remember to never stop learning and enjoy the randomness.